Good morning and welcome to our Wednesday morning talk here in Nowhere Village. It is June 3rd, 2020, and our nation continues to dive further and further into crisis, it seems. And we just so happen to be in a little chapter in our exploration here about fear as all of this is coming up. And so the talk I will give today is very, very much speaking to exactly what's going on right now today in our country, in our world, and in our hearts and in our minds. And it also happens to loop in with what we've been working on. And so I will also share a little bit of teachings from at least one of my favorite sources about fear and how we can work through fear in the spiritual practice. I specifically today want to talk about trauma and what it looks like to be a trauma-informed citizen in a nation that is going through severe trauma right now and coping with and trying to, and in ways that are conscious and unconscious, we are all digging up generations of trauma that if you just pick up any history book, and it's not how I was taught history, but now when I look back and I look through these history books, I go, oh my goodness, what must have it felt like to be living through that? And here we are now in a culture that seems ready in certain ways to actually face this trauma and heal. So that's the heart of what I'm going to start with. And we've got some really beautiful questions and just offerings from the members too, which I'm going to be weaving through everything that we talk about. So my understanding of trauma has really ripened in the last handful of years from my own personal experiences. And I know what I was going to say. I was like, there's something I'm forgetting. The other thing that I really want to talk about and that will be talked about is the relationship between our spiritual practice and activism or political work or social work or environmental work. But in other words, the relationship between the inner work on the self and the outer work on the world. Okay, so that's another thing that is coming up for some people that I've been talking to, is feeling this great tension there. So we're going to talk about that too. And all throughout, we're going to have to be talking about power and privilege and how that all relates. Okay, so my experience with trauma. My main education with trauma is really the same. It's my main education with everything, which is just from my own personal experience, from my own life. That being said, I've read lots of books, and besides just working with really great therapists and healers with my own trauma, I've researched a lot, and I have practiced and studied, and I now have 10 years of experience of working with others. And for the first few years, I didn't get that a lot of what I was doing the whole time was about trauma. And now that I do, it's a really helpful viewfinder, right? Or it's a very helpful kind of way of looking at the world. And so I'm going to go ahead and share with you guys a little bit about that. We experience trauma anytime that something happens that's really scary, pretty much, in a nutshell. And anytime that your physical body, that your life is being threatened in some way, there's the potential for there to become a trauma. It could become a traumatic experience. And with any kind of trauma, there needs to be some kind of the reason why we have a trauma response in certain circumstances is the body is trying to protect itself. It needs to feel safe. And until we are able to get to a safe space, the physical animal body that you do inhabit, right, that you do live through, that physical animal body is going to act in kind of weird ways. It's like a flip has been switched, and you want that flip to be able to be switched. And we're not in conscious control anymore. Our reptilian part of the brain goes into control because that's actually our best bet at making sure that we then go get safe, that we get safe. Once we get safe, once the physical body is in a safe place again, then there's all sorts of things that we can do. And I'm going to talk about those things that I know that a lot of you want to do this self-examination, to really look at the system, to try to see what can I do to help. You cannot do that until you're out of the trauma experience, until you are in a safe space. Your body will not let you. There is an overriding mechanism to any rationality, to any, right? Because we need to kind of chuck that stuff so that we can get free and safe, and then we can find it again. These are ancient, and like this stuff's in your DNA. It's in your body. You don't understand. We don't understand how we're going to respond when we're in trauma. It's been really interesting for me to observe, and this is one thing that when you're in a safe space, when you're not feeling traumatized, you could do some inquiry practice for yourself. How do I respond? And you can look back at traumatic experiences in your life and see what kind of mechanisms got put in place. But certain mechanisms get put in place. We immediately kind of go to something or go into a mode to get safe. And it'd be interesting to see what that's like. When you're in that mode, you're not really in conscious control. You're not supposed to be. I personally have like a hero mode that I go into where I'm like, I'm going to fix everything. And not until I feel like things are safe can I actually like rest again and get out of that. Sometimes I go to another place. There's a much deeper place, which is like a child that's like on the floor, desperate for comfort and care. It really depends on what the circumstances are. But just observing that for yourself, and this is going to be a huge theme for the whole thing. We have to be able to observe these things in non-judgment, Notice how you respond when you're in the trauma state. And then we can start to look at what helps, right? And so much of what I do is I just offer you guys techniques and practices. And my hope is that we practice them together, and then they're in your toolkit. So when I'm not there and you're out in the world and shit's happening, you can access that when you need it. Now, look, there's going to be different tools for when you're in a trauma state than when you're not. I don't want you doing inquiry practice. I don't want you philosophizing about the state of the whole world when your body doesn't feel safe. It's actually pushing you further out of the embodied experience. And it's the embodied experience where the trauma is happening, where we're experiencing it. And it's the place where the healing has to start. And so the most basic practices, these are what we want to work with when we're going through fear. So the number one rule right? Rule. I don't like that word, but the number one thing is keep coming back to your embodied experience. And that's gonna seem really counterintuitive in some ways. But if you keep coming back to your embodied experience, listen, your embodied experience is going to tell you how to respond, and it will have wisdom that your conscious mind doesn't have. Listen to your embodied experience. Start to learn when you're really rattled. And at first you might not know, so err on the side of caution. When you're really rattled, go somewhere safe. Get thee to a safe space. We are animals, and so we're very responsive to our environment. If the environment doesn't feel safe, if the people in it don't feel safe, that nervous system is not going to shut down, because it's not supposed to, actually. It's protecting you. This is not the time to process your trauma until you get to the safe space. Sorry, and not even, I want you to ground the trauma first. We can process it even later. We can process it and think about it and all that later. First, treat yourself the way that you would treat any being in trauma, any being who is in a great amount of fear. Re-establish trust. This is one of those key words for me, trust. Once we get into a safe space, once we feel trust again, and again, I would love for you to make a little list for yourself of these resources, these places you can turn inward and outward, calling a friend or calling your guru, or like the Ma Durga, right? Whoever you call, whatever you turn to, whatever practice you reach for. Maybe make a little list of those for when you get in this really triggered state. When we're afraid, we go into the kleshas, and I'm not going to give you big teaching about that. I talked about it last week, but in essence, this is what the Yoga Sutras say happens. We feel fear, abhinivesha, we feel fear. We tend to grasp after certain things and push away others. And then he says that we tend to cling to our identities and our stories about self. And so to avoid letting that whole cycle happen, instead of this grasping, which tends to happen, right? Give me something to get me through this, right? Can you have a little list of things in a way that's not grasping, but that it's just, reaching for, lovingly, reach for the things that you need. And we get to a place where we have to defend and push away when we haven't been able to have a safe space, safe boundaries. So your animal body has needs and it has boundaries. And when those needs aren't met, it's going to try to reach. And when those boundaries aren't respected, it's going to try to push. Right? And so find yourself in a place where you have what you need. And when you're in a trauma state, maybe you need a little extra. It's okay. Maybe right now you need 2 friends. I don't know, maybe you right now just need to go ahead and have a whole thing of ice cream. I don't know. But give yourself permission to actually comfort yourself and know that, okay, no, you're not going to eat ice cream every time that you get a little freaked out. But when we're in a really, really deep state, go ahead and lovingly, as a gesture of kindness, let yourself indulge a little bit in things that are comfortable. Don't force yourself to do some really rigid practice, And same thing with that devesha, that it's natural to be get away from me when we're afraid to certain things. Even if they didn't cause the harm, if they remind us of the harm, if they're a trigger in any way, or if they just don't really know how to hold safe space for us, instead of pushing them away, which we often get to that place because we haven't declared our boundaries well, figure out what are the boundaries that you need, and really, this is the hardest part, I think, for a lot of us. Know that you deserve that. If we woke up, look, the number one thing that you can do is to heal yourself and awaken yourself and empower yourself. And then that healthy, awake, empowered human being will naturally do what needs to be done. It just happens. Enlightened beings are just instruments of the goodness in the universe. If we woke up tomorrow and every being in this on this planet was healed of their trauma, including the person who's the president right now, I mean, man, that would be a different world. So you working on your trauma and your fear and whatever name you want to give it, but your stuff, what we all do together is the work. It's one part of the work. Okay, everyone experiences some kind of trauma. Now I want to speak a little bit about a specific kind of trauma. And this is oppression. Oppression is a particular kind of trauma. I'll give you an example. The first really traumatic experience I had, I was 22 and I was in a bus accident with a group of students who were traveling abroad. And one person on the bus died in the accident. And I had it was very interesting trauma response that I had. I went into hero mode. I ended up having an experience of kind of dissociation where I saw the person who had passed away, but I was telling everyone that he hadn't, that he was fine. But then when I realized that he had, it was very clear that dissociation and that disconnect wasn't jarring. I just kind of went on. I just kept going in crisis mode. And I realized, oh, wow, Erin, your mind did this really interesting thing where it protected itself from knowing the truth, this very scary truth, until you were ready to process it. And I thought, well, that's interesting. That's a trauma response. Now I know that, so was me like jumping out of the bus and trying to help everyone. And then I went into a really hard crash period later after my body stopped feeling in fear, right? Now, in that case, we were taken care of. It was a traffic accident. It had to do with an electrical failure in a traffic light. It was a horrible accident, and everyone around treated us with enormous compassion. We got so much care. We got put up in a really nice hotel for the night in the local German town where we were. Everyone was looking out for each other's needs, and we were all going through it together. And so I was able to process this trauma, right? It would be very different if someone had intentionally shut down that light. If someone had been targeting us as tourists, or if for any other reason we weren't all in it together, if for any reason it felt like it was done maliciously. Because what happens when someone intentionally hurts you, anytime someone intentionally hurts you, it comes with an extra layer of suffering, an extra layer of trauma, and there's an extra layer of psychological and emotional things that are going to have to be dealt with if we have been a target. Anytime, right? And so this is trauma already. We already have trauma in the world. We already have death. We're mortal. We already have fear. We already have sadness. These are all pre-existing conditions. That's part of the human condition, period. But this extra thing of, if somebody were to, when people are intentionally cruel, when people are intentionally taking away, when people are intentionally creating suffering, it creates this really fucked up situation. And now add on to this, if someone intentionally creates malice, creates suffering, and then they're not held accountable. And in fact, they are protected, right, by bigger powers. Then that creates even more of this psychological disconnect. Even more of this sense of infuriation and frustration. If the whole world seems to run in a space where so we have a situation where there's discrimination, and some people, can you guys make sure you're all staying muted? Thanks. Okay. And some people get, right, some people, when they get in a bus accident, get taken to a nice hotel and they get taken care of, and they, when some people go through trauma, they get resources. And if there were other people, they said, oh no, we don't give you resources for this. You're just gonna have to deal with it differently. Once there starts to be injustice in terms of who gets violence done against them, or who has to suffer the most, and in terms of who gets the most support when they're struggling and suffering, and who gets the most resources, then we start to get into a different kind of trauma. Because in that space, a sense of chaos enters in. Last week we talked about the golden rule, right? To me, spirituality should be really, really simple. Like, at the heart of everything, it is do unto others as you would do to yourself, right? At the heart of everything, every little child knows we all deserve the same things. It's just built in. It's really confusing when you start to see, it was very confusing for me when I started to see sexism and racism very early on. It was really confusing. I didn't understand. And I went to, how can I protect myself as a little girl from being oppressed the way that all these other women seem to be oppressed? It's very confusing. And for every single person in this system that we're in now, which is a system that is built on discrimination, right? It's a country that is built out of slave labor. It's a land that was taken away from peaceful indigenous people. Not that they're all, but people who are living just here, living their lives, and all of the excuses that have been made throughout time, all of this, we're too smart for it, and every 2-year-old is too smart for it, really, And so what I'm talking about is living in a system where discrimination is present. So not just oppression. We're not all oppressed, right? Equally. It creates a feeling of, just in every person, kind of a psychological terror. Because I know when I'm watching a video of a Black body on the ground, I know that could be me. And it's really, really infuriating. I know it could be my friends. I know it could be, right? Like we understand that on that 2-year-old level, the empathy is there, that empathic response. And it's confusing. It's very confusing, Because why does he get that and I don't? Why does, so, and it actually gives those who do have the power over other people's bodies, it gives them this extra, almost like godlike allure, or it gives them this extra power. And it's the most infuriating thing that this particular human being, just on a whim, could decide to not listen to the needs of another person. That could happen at any moment to any of us. And that chaos is this extra factor, that potential chaos, the whimsicality of it. That's the sense of injustice that just boils us. So this isn't right. And then it makes us feel like we're living in a really confusing, crazy reality where there isn't a sense of there isn't actually a sense of order. So the experience that we're all having right now is confusing. It is painful. There are a lot of different layers and aspects to it. And again, I just want to say that I just want you to really get that it's okay for you to take your time. And it's okay and not just okay, it is actually essential that you be looking at your own, what are the experiences that this brings up for you? Now, I'm going to talk about social media. I'm going to talk about public interfacing. Certain things can be accomplished there, but Facebook, social media, public spaces like this, these are not what I would call safe spaces. You have to get yourself to a safe space, right? Nowhere Village is created to be something like that. It can't be everything, but I hope that it is starting to become something like that. But that is not the place, if you're triggered or you're traumatized, to be hanging out. And I know a lot of people are saying, okay, well, if you want to stand up for our cause and do something, then change. And we all need to change. But understand that this is a process. And that if right now you're worried about what can I do to fix it? What can I do to help? You're probably up in your mind. You're probably not in your own body and in your own trauma and with yourself. And you're probably not going to be able to really get to anywhere that feels really satisfying. You might be able to send some money somewhere and that makes you feel a little better. You might be able to share a post and it makes you feel like you're part of it. And that's all fine. That's all great. Please continue to do that. I just mean, this shit's old and deep. And we need and deserve to take our time, The problem with being traumatized for centuries for longer through systemic oppression is that often it feels like there is no safe space to go. I got hit with all of this trauma over the weekend and guys, the first thing that happened was I don't have time. I have to work. And then I started to think about how fucked up that is, right? For those of us who don't have a lot of wealth, what traumatic experiences look like for us. Well, just got to go back to work. And think about that reality for so many people, on this planet. Those that are being subjugated the most are also the ones that don't have the time, the energy, the resources, the health to actually do their trauma work. And so that just made me more mad. Do you know what I mean? And what I did do, of course, I've ended up taking a few days. I haven't been very productive the last few days. And turns out maybe my whole career path is going to be in something, kind of shifted by this. And maybe me just working in that other direction wasn't the way to go anyway. So everyone has trauma. Every single person that you're dealing with right now. And so learning how to, and each one of them has their different coping mechanisms. And until each one of them can get to a safe space and put those down and come back to a sense of center, they're going to be acting from some kind of place of a trauma response or some kind of place of fear. And so giving as within, so without. So as you practice how to give yourself the time and the space to heal and recover, as you start to learn how to practice asking for help to get your needs met, this has been a big practice for me. And as you get practice helping setting boundaries around yourself when you need them, you will also become better and better at doing that for other people, right? At respecting other people and for seeing when other people don't know how to ask for help and they don't know how to ask for boundaries or put down boundaries, really. And then what does it look like, guys? It looks like raga and devesha. It looks like that pushing and pulling. It looks like a war. It looks like a fight. It looks like this is mine, right? And I don't want this. So as you're in these interactions, if you see yourself raga and devesha-ing, get thee to a safe space, calm down, get support, you know? And you need to give other people permission to do the same. Whatever side of the argument they're on, everybody deserves that. And now I'm going to go through these little questions in these last couple minutes. And if you have questions, you can bring them in. But, I'm going to speak to Lee's question here. And I'm not going to read it through just because I'm aware of the time. But, she's talking about this belief, the spiritual teachings say we're all equal. We're all equal, right? And what she's asking about is, but it's not helpful to pretend that we all have the same experience, right? How can we act right now in a way that spreads kindness and connection rather than division? Oh, and I'll go ahead and bring in now, this is the perfect moment to bring in this Heart Sutra quote for you guys. Yeah, okay. He says, Bodhisattvas take refuge in the Prajnaparamita. In other words, the practices. Prajnaparamita means the wisdom of the beyond. Bodhisattvas take refuge in Prajnaparamita and live without walls of the mind. Without walls of the mind, and thus without fears, they see through delusions and finally nirvana. So in a sense, he's saying, when we're doing our practices and we're not in that trauma state, when we're not afraid, we can see clearly through the delusions. We can see clearly through the avidya, is what we were calling it last week, but our false stories. And so these texts are all about our wholeness, our oneness. And Lee, like you say, we are all equal. And I believe that 100%. A million percent. Every single being is equally capable of suffering. Every single body is equally deserving of respect for its needs and its boundaries. That's not happening. That's not happening. Like you say, every single body on this planet is not being equally respected. And that's the issue, right? That's the heart of the issue. I mean, how many times are we gonna be devastated for the body of our planet? for Indigenous bodies, for immigrant bodies, for women's bodies, for Black bodies, for children's bodies, for LGBTQ bodies. You see, it doesn't, you sign up for any of the causes, go find a good movement in any of them because it's all actually working for the same thing. Right now, we want the Black voices to be loud and clear because right now they're leading, but I see it as one movement really, and they're leading this division, right, this chapter, because it's their moment and we need to give them that, right? And then when I'm sure we'll have another opportunity to stand up for other bodies, unfortunately, very soon. But the problem, yes, so then what do we do? And my suggestion is, or my interpretation that I'll bring you from the teachings is what we were talking about a couple weeks ago. What do we do when we see evil in the world? I don't like that word. I never use that word, but what do we do when we see wrong in the world? What do we do when we see injustice in the world? There we go. What do we see? What do we do when we say, wait, why is that person being treated like shit? I might be in favor right now with the authority, but they could whimsically turn on me too, right? And I mean, as one perspective, and then of course, if we're just really woke and we get to see everything, we see how it's all connected, then we'll come from there. But it's also okay to come from that personal, embodied, empathic experience of like, I don't want that to happen to me. However you get there, we all get there, that this isn't right. When we see something not right in the world, the teachings tell us to practice equanimity. And all of you parents, I think it looks a little something like this is kind of crazy, right? It's like, you basically have to it's almost like working with a toddler. It's crazy, I know, but this toddler happens to be in power, right? Which makes it confusing and challenging and hard. But equanimity means being able to say, I am holding you responsible, but you are not my enemy. I'm holding you responsible in love, out of love. I'm holding you responsible because I love the bodies that are being hurt so much. And I love my body. And guess what? I love your body too. But right now you are causing, chaos, or you are causing more harm. And so finding ways when we do need to speak up, finding ways to always do it from that place of love. Do it as the protector of those who don't have advocates, or don't have enough advocacy, or don't have enough rights, and don't have enough resources. And there is a way to do it while still respecting the needs and the boundaries, while modeling for them love and compassion. For people who have a lot of power, they are able to grasp for more power and privilege. They have a lot of privilege is one form of power. For those who have a lot of privilege, part of their trauma response, guys, is grabbing for privilege. Me too. In these moments where everyone's afraid, the people who are, for their identities and their worldviews and their stories of self and their stories of reality that are so deeply ingrained, are very much being rattled and shaken right now. And they are afraid. Everybody is so afraid right now. We were already just a mess when this happened. We were already looking forward to rebuilding, getting back on our feet, and this happens. And that's true of everyone. Okay, as a teacher, Pam, how do we acknowledge this and then move through to a place where we can, get back to comfort and safety? I think what she's saying is basically, how do I offer support that is not delusionally blinding out the realities of the world, but also brings us to a safe space. And hopefully I spoke to this a little bit. My favorite thing to do right now, the heart of what we do is listening. Traumatic, when we're in a situation where there's traumatic oppression, and systemic oppression and trauma caused by oppression, part of this trauma experience is that the bodies that aren't being respected, their voices aren't being heard. Please stop. I can't breathe. We've all felt some version of saying, hey, 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 please, and not having a response and not having someone respond, right? It's vital that everyone who feels afraid has a space where they can show up and speak. So for one thing I would say for teachers and facilitators, make space at the, just to check in with people. It makes all the difference in the world. Just letting them know that you're space holding, letting them know that you're also going through it, and letting them know, okay, we're going to make space for this and we're going to find practices that are going to bring us beyond it. For those who have a conservative family and you're afraid of talking to them, again, hopefully some of what I said helped you feel like you have the total right and you have the space to just be with yourself before you engage that way. There might be some pressure online to like stand up and do, you don't have to stand up until you're ready. And let me know if you want to dialogue a little bit about what's most effective. Again, for me, just recognizing everybody's afraid, being able to listen to them too, listen to everybody about what their fears are. Learning how to talk about this stuff. And Kristen, you've been fighting going into shutdown mode over and over. Shutdown mode feels ever near. Sorry, I don't know if I was supposed to say that, but for those who are experiencing that, like I said, I gave in. I personally gave in to shutdown mode as much as I could. You guys have got kids, you've got work, you've got other things you've got to show up for. Etch out the space. This is the time. This is the thing that's happening in our world right now, guys. This is happening. Make the time to get safe. Make the time to get strong. Shut down. I believe that that's your body with wisdom. And we don't know what's up ahead, actually. We don't know what the next challenge is going to be. We need to be okay. We need to be rested. We need to be safe. We need to be healthy. I didn't really hear this for myself when the COVID crisis struck. And I stayed in kind of an extended manic state for a couple months, frankly, working on my project and my solution. This time, I gave in to the trauma response and I let myself go all the way through it. And I'll tell you, it's been really hard and painful and I've just cried so much, but every one of these experiences has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if we don't make the time and space to go through it now, it's just going to keep coming up. That's how trauma works. So it's all closed, right? When we are in a space where we can actually face it and move through it, we stop being so triggered by it. Once it stops living in the shadows and it becomes acknowledged and part of, like we're doing right now, part of our conversation, part of our processing, then it's not going to like sneak attack us like it did last week when I thought I was just standing up for the rights of bodies, innocent bodies. Like I ended up triggering myself. I ended up bringing about in my own body such intense memories of my own experiences with oppression myself and abuse myself that it floored me. And so what I'm saying is it's a privilege to have space and time to work that out find it for yourself and reach out to me if I can help. I know I have to wrap this up right now, but how to reach out to Black colleagues to show support, offer listening. Yeah, there are a lot of resources, Kristen, and I will put some in Nowhere Village. I haven't been putting a lot of political stuff in Nowhere Village. I've been doing it on Facebook, but I will start putting over some resources for everybody in terms of that, because I'm seeing from my community a ton of great resources and places where we can start, books we can read, little handouts where we can, the different organizations that are really doing a great job that we can help support. And I'll share that with you. But absolutely, I think these skills that we're all building together about listening, but what is meditation but just listening quietly, growing our awareness of the situation, and simply saying, making just saying, I'm here to support you. I have a Black friend who wrote a post that just said, I am going through a really hard time, guys. And what we all ended up posting was basically the same thing. He's like, I don't want you to fix it. I don't want you to tell me about your suffering. I don't want any of that. And every comment was basically, I love you. I love you. I love you, my friend. I love you. And like, that's it. That's a huge thing right now. Stand up, but just say what's really true and the simplest version. Let's just all say the simplest version of the truth. I am here for you. I see this is really fucked up, and I'm trying to figure out what I can do to help. Please guide me if you can. I also understand that also is that's emotional labor, right? That's labor, that's intellectual labor and work for them. So you can also say, like, your job right now is not to take care of me or educate me or inform me, but know that I'm an ally and I'm here. And if I can do anything, I'm on call, Okay, I'm gonna wrap this one, my dear, wonderful, beloved community. This conversation just goes on, of course, but please, please, please do reach out. I want us to be making a difference here. Thank you, Pam. And it really does start with this inner work. We have to all get to a place where we're safe enough and we have the health and the strength, and then we have so much to offer this world. We can change it. I know we can. We're doing it.